In a city built on blood and ambition, the most dangerous people are the ones hiding in plain sight. The Obsidian Room wasn't a restaurant, it was a throne room disguised as elegance, where senators traded secrets over ribeye, celebrities drowned scandals in vintage wine, and men like Marcus Costello came to pretend the bodies beneath their empires had long since turned to dust. He sat beneath chandelier light that cost more per hour than most people earned in a month, platinum cufflinks catching the glow, jaw carved from marble and menace. To the world scrolling past his name in Forbes, he was the visionary who transformed abandoned buildings into luxury towers and chaos into calculated wealth. To those who whispered his other name, the architect, he was still the man who'd rebuilt the Chicago underworld brick by bloody brick, still the son who'd buried his father at 16 and inherited an empire soaked in vendetta. Tonight, he was trying to remember what peace felt like, and moving behind the bar like smoke through shadows was Evelyn Marlowe, a bartender who didn't smile the way the others did. Bright and eager, designed to dissolve into tips and thank yous, her face carried the kind of stillness that came from witnessing things no one should survive and surviving them anyway. Her hands, precise and steady as a surgeon's, poured whiskey and mixed cocktails with a rhythm that felt almost tactical. Marcus noticed. He told himself he shouldn't have. But there was something in the way she watched the room, not with a bartender's casual awareness, but with an operative's vigilance. Her eyes catalogued exits like other people memorized drink orders. Her posture whispered coiled violence, not service. She moved as if perpetually measuring distances, calculating threats, preparing for dangers that didn't exist. Except tonight, they did. At 9:47 p.m., the lights flickered once. At 9:48, the first bullet shattered the mirror behind the bar like a scream frozen in glass. By 9:49, the Obsidian Room had become a different kind of cage entirely, one where the walls were panic, the bars were gunfire, and the only key to survival was a woman no one had bothered to truly see. But to understand how a bartender became the only thing standing between a mafia king and death, you need to understand that Evelyn Marlowe wasn't born in the shadows of Chicago bars. She was forged somewhere far colder in black sites, where the CIA sent ghosts to do work that would never exist on paper. Her codename was Ghost. 2 years ago, she died. At least, that's what her file said. And Marcus Costello? He'd spent a lifetime believing power made him immortal. Tonight, 6 men with cartel training and a vendetta, 10 years in the making, were about to prove him wrong. Welcome back, beautiful souls. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button. It takes 1 second but means the world. Drop a like if you're ready for this ride, and share this with someone who loves a story that hits different. Now settle in, and let me take you somewhere you've never been. Shattered glass. A scream. Chaos swallowed the room in an instant. The first bullet tore through the mirror behind the bar, and the world of the Obsidian Room collapsed like shards of crystal raining onto the marble floor. Guests shrieked, shoved, crawled, and clawed their way under tables. A woman in a red dress pitched forward, her high heel snapping at the arch. A senator dining with his mistress lunged beneath the table in a panic, his face drained to chalk. 6 dark figures surged in through the front entrance, automatic rifles in their hands, masks sealing their faces, moving in a military formation. They were not robbers. They were assassins, and they had only one target. Marcus Costello did not run. He flipped a table, the 3-inch thick oak becoming a shield against gunfire. Food exploded across the air. Wine poured like blood over white linen. He moved not like a businessman, but like a predator long accustomed to the scent of danger. The first gunman rushed him, barrel aimed straight at Marcus's chest. A mistake. Marcus slipped left, his left hand clamping the barrel and driving it upward, his right hand seizing the attacker's wrist and twisting. Bone cracked with the dry snap of dead wood breaking. The gunman screamed. The weapon clattered to the floor. Marcus kicked it away, then hauled the enemy in front of him as a living shield. The second gunman fired in bursts. Bullets ripped into his own teammate's back. Marcus let the body drop and surged forward like a human projectile. His elbow slammed into the second gunman's temple with force enough to drop a bull. The attacker crumpled, eyes rolling back, never even understanding what had happened. The architect did not only design, he destroyed. Across the room, Eve had moved from the very first second. When the first bullet flew, her hand was already reaching for a bottle of Macallan, 25 years old, a liquor worth more than a month of her pay. She did not hesitate. The bottle spun through the air like a thrown weapon and smashed into the face of the third gunman as he advanced toward the bar. He staggered, blood bursting from a broken nose. Eve sprang over the bar, her motion smooth as running water. Her foot drove into the stunned gunman's chest, shoving him flat onto his back. She ripped the rifle from his hands, pivoted, and fired a single shot. The bullet buried itself in the shoulder of the fourth gunman, who was about to shoot Marcus in the back. Precise, cold, as if she had done this 1,000 times. Because she had. Ghost moved through the wrecked room like a specter worthy of her code name. No one saw her come. They only saw what she left behind. The last 2 gunmen realized the threat too late. They swung their rifles toward Eve, but Marcus was already there. He grabbed one by the back of the neck and smashed his head into a granite column, a hard, brittle crack. The other leveled his rifle at Marcus, finger tightening on the trigger. Eve fired first. The bullet punched through the gun hand. He howled, the weapon falling away. Marcus finished it with a punch to the throat. Only one man remained standing. Diego Vega, the commander, held at the rear door. He had not joined the fight, he had watched. And when he saw 5 men sprawled across the marble that was now stained red, he knew this battle was lost. Diego backed through the doorway, serpent eyes fixed on Marcus. "Salazar will take your life, Costello," he shouted, his voice thick with hatred. "You and that whore bartender, too." Then he vanished into the dark. Silence fell, heavy, suffocating. The sharp stink of gunpowder mingled with the perfume of expensive candles and spilled wine. The sound of shell casings rolling across marble rang out inside the stillness. 5 bodies lay unmoving. Blood spread through shattered crystal. The chandelier still glittered, as if nothing had happened. Marcus stood in the wreckage, breathing hard, his suit torn at the shoulder, blood on his knuckles. He looked at Eve. She stood 10 steps away, the gun still in her hand, her stance ready for the next strike. No trembling, no fear, only the deadly calm of someone far too familiar with violence. Their eyes met across the blood-soaked room, and in that moment, they both understood one thing. The other was not ordinary. Not at all. The silence stretched between them like a steel cable pulled so tight it was about to snap. Gun smoke still hung in the air, braided with the smell of blood and spilled liquor. Somewhere in the restaurant, a woman was sobbing in small, broken sounds. Glass crunched and whispered under someone's foot as they tried to crawl out from hiding. But Marcus and Eve did not move. They simply stood there, staring, measuring, like 2 wild animals that had just discovered they were not the only predator in this territory. Marcus spoke first, his voice low and rough, still carrying the ragged edge of breath from a fight that had only just ended. "What kind of bartender taught you to shoot like that?" Eve didn't blink. She lowered the gun but did not let it go, her finger still riding the frame beside the trigger like a quiet warning. "What kind of CEO taught you to kill with your bare hands?" Something flickered across Marcus's eyes. Not anger, maybe amusement, maybe curiosity, maybe both. He tilted his head at her as if working through a difficult puzzle, and she was the last piece that refused to fit. A door opened behind them. A tall man stepped in, black suit, a face carved from stone, eyes sweeping the scene with the calm of someone who had witnessed too many versions of this. Dominic Russo, Marcus Costello's right hand. People whispered that Dom had been with Marcus since they were street kids, and that he would die before he ever let anyone lay a hand on his boss. Watching him step over bodies the way a man steps over furniture, Eve believed every word of it. Boss. Dom dipped his head to Marcus, then cut his gaze to Eve, assessing. "Who is she?" "Good question." Marcus said it without taking his eyes off Eve. "Clean this up. Call Kowalski at the police department. Tell him this was an armed robbery. The robbers got away. Find enough witnesses willing to confirm that story." Dom nodded, pulled out his phone, and started making calls. He didn't ask anything else. He didn't need to. That was how things worked in Marcus Costello's world. Eve used the moment, while Marcus turned to speak with Dom, to ease backward toward the rear exit. 1 step, 2. If she was fast enough, she could vanish into the Chicago night before anyone realized. She had done it 100 times. Disappearing was her craft. But she hadn't taken a 3rd step when Marcus's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp as a blade. "You're not going anywhere. Not after what I just saw." Eve stopped. She could run. She could turn and fight. But something in his tone held her still. Not a threat. A certainty, absolute and unshakable, that he would find her no matter where she fled. She turned back to face him. "I don't owe you an explanation." Marcus walked toward her, slow, 1 measured step at a time, like a panther driving prey into a corner. "But you owe me an answer." He stopped less than a meter away, close enough for her to see the fine specks of blood on the collar of his white shirt, close enough for her to feel the heat rising off a body that had just survived a fight to the death. "Why do Victor Salazar's people have your photo in their intelligence file?" Eve went rigid. Her whole body locked as if someone had poured ice water straight into her veins. Victor Salazar. That name. The Sinaloa cartel. And he had her picture. That meant he'd known about her before. Before tonight. Before the gunman stormed in. Marcus watched her reaction with the cold satisfaction of a man confirming his suspicion. He knew. Somehow, he knew she was not just a bartender. Sirens wailed in the distance, drawing nearer. The police were coming. Even if Dominic had people inside the department, even if the story was being staged, Eve's presence here was still an unnecessary variable, a variable that could destroy everything she had built over the last 2 years. Marcus knew that, and he was using it as leverage. "Get in the car." He said it in a voice that was no longer a request, but an order. "Or you explain everything here, in front of the police who are on their way." The sirens came closer. 30 seconds, maybe less. Eve glanced toward the rear door where the darkness was calling. Then she looked back at Marcus, into those eyes as black as tar, waiting for her decision. She had no choice. Not really. A black Maybach was parked right out front, engine still running, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. Eve climbed in, taking in the scent of premium leather and expensive wood. Marcus slid in beside her. The door shut behind them, heavy and final, like the lid of a coffin dropping into place. The private elevator carried them up to the 47th floor in silence. Eve counted each second, feeling the pressure shift in her ears as the cabin rose. She had been in danger more times than she could count, had faced death more often than numbers could hold. But something about the man standing beside her set every sense she had on alert. Marcus Costello didn't look at her the entire ride. He simply stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the steel doors as if he were thinking about something far more important than the woman he had just kidnapped. The elevator doors opened, and Eve stepped into another world. Marcus's penthouse spread out before her like a declaration of power. Open space, high ceilings, glass walls from floor to ceiling, framing the whole sweep of Chicago at night. The interior was so minimal it bordered on austere. A black leather sofa, a glass table, a few expensive abstract paintings that Eve suspected cost as much as her entire apartment. No family photos, no personal objects, no sign that a real human being actually lived here. Cold, expensive, empty. Like its owner, Dominic had somehow arrived before them, standing guard outside the door like a statue made of flesh and muscle. He gave Marcus a small nod as they passed, but said nothing, only closed the door behind them with a soft click that sounded like a cell lock. Marcus went straight to the bar in the corner, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and set one on the glass table in front of a single armchair. "Sit." He said it not as an invitation, but as an order. Eve didn't sit. She stood there with her arms folded, her eyes sweeping the room for exits the way instinct had trained her bones to do. 2 doors, 1 elevator, an emergency stairwell to the east, windows that didn't open, the 47th floor, no path that didn't go through Dominic. Marcus watched her with a look of amusement. He settled into a leather chair, crossed one leg over the other, and took a sip of whiskey. The balance of power was set. He sat, comfortable, in control. She stood, tense, trapped, and they both knew it. Marcus set his glass down, reached for a leather briefcase on the side table. He opened it, pulled out a thin file, and tossed it onto the glass table in front of Eve. "Evelyn Marlowe," he read aloud, the tone of a man presenting a business report. 27 years old. Bartender at the Obsidian Room for the last 3 months. Address is a studio apartment in Lincoln Park. No family, no friends, no past. He paused, his eyes locking on hers. Evelyn Marlowe did not exist before 2 years ago. No birth certificate, no social security, no school records, no medical records, not a single trace that you ever existed in this world, as if you were born out of nothing. Eve didn't react. She had been trained to keep a poker face in any situation, but inside, her heart was pounding out of control. He had investigated her. He knew. Marcus flipped to the next page of the file, and Eve felt the blood drain from her face. It was a photograph, her in black tactical gear, a rifle in her hands, standing beside a man she had been trying to forget for 2 years. "Nathan Cross, or as if someone had erased you from the system," Marcus went on, and now his voice was softer, more dangerous. "And only a handful of organizations in this world can do that." He stood, slowly, and walked toward Eve. She didn't step back. She would not give him that satisfaction. Marcus stopped right in front of her, close enough for her to see the flecks of gold in his deep brown eyes, close enough to catch the scent of expensive cologne and gunpowder still clinging to his lapel. "I have people in the FBI," Marcus said quietly. "In the CIA, in the NSA. I can find out anything about you, if I want to. But I want to hear it from your own mouth. Who are you? And why does a Mexican cartel want you dead along with me?" Silence stretched between them. Eve could lie. She was an expert at lying, but looking into Marcus's eyes, she knew he wouldn't believe any fabricated story. And worse, he would go hunting for the truth himself, a truth that could kill her faster than any bullet. Eve turned away and walked to the glass window. Chicago spread out below her, millions of lights blinking like shards of broken glass scattered over black velvet. Beautiful, cold, dangerous, like everything in her life. "You want to know who I am?" she said, her voice strangely calm, as if she were talking about the weather and not secrets she had buried for 2 years. "Then sit down." She turned back to Marcus, and in her eyes was something he had never seen before. Not fear, not anger, acceptance, from someone who was exhausted from running, because this story isn't for the faint of heart. Marcus sat down as she asked. He didn't say a word, only watched her with the cold, sharp eyes of a man used to assessing everything, including people. Eve stayed by the window, her back to the city lights, letting the darkness hide part of her face. It was easier to breathe when she told a story in the dark, easier when no one could see her eyes. "I was orphaned when I was 6, she began, her voice even, like she was reading a weather report. "My parents died in a car accident. At least that's what they told me. I grew up in the foster care system, passed from one family to another, 12 families in 12 years. No one wanted to keep a child who was too smart, too observant, too good at seeing through people." She paused and swallowed. Marcus didn't move. "When I was 18, someone came looking for me. They said they were from a special scholarship program. They lied." Eve gave a small, flat laugh that never reached her eyes. "They were the CIA. They'd been watching me since I was 14. High IQ. Extraordinary adaptability. No family, no friends. No one who would miss me if I died. The perfect candidate." She turned to look at Marcus, and in her eyes there was something old and tired, like ash from a fire that had burned too long. "They called me Ghost. A ghost. My job was to slip into places no one could enter, do things the government would never acknowledge, and vanish as if I had never existed. I was good at it. Too good." She looked down at her hands that had taken so many lives she could no longer remember them all. "When I was 23, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I fell in love." She said the word as if it tasted bitter on her tongue. "Nathan Cross. My handler, the man responsible for coordinating my missions. He was smart, charming, and he said exactly what I wanted to hear. I thought he loved me. I thought I had finally found someone." She stopped and drew a deep breath. 2 years later, when I was 25, I got a mission in Colombia, break a human trafficking ring. Simple, clean, in and out. Except when I reached the rendezvous point, there was no support team waiting, only 12 cartel gunmen. Her voice trembled slightly, but she forced it steady. 3 bullets, 1 in the shoulder, 1 in the ribs, 1 through my left lung. I went down in a filthy alley in Medellin, certain I was going to die there. I lay in my own blood for 6 hours before an old local woman found me. She didn't call the police. She dragged me into her home, pulled the bullets out with pliers, and stitched the wounds with sewing thread. I don't know why she saved me. I didn't ask. Eve walked to the bar, took the whiskey Marcus had poured for her earlier, and drained it in one swallow. The liquor burned down her throat, but she didn't flinch. 3 weeks later, when I could stand, I hacked into the CIA system. I wanted to know what had happened. I found Nathan's report. He had sold the details of my mission to the cartel. He sold me, and the CIA, instead of hunting him down, declared me dead and erased every trace of me from the system. Clean, neat, no agent named Ghost, no one who had to answer questions. She set the glass down and looked at Marcus. "It took me 2 years to build a new identity. Evelyn Marlowe, bartender, a normal life, a chance to forget." She smiled, bitterly. Then tonight happened. Silence settled over the room. Marcus said nothing for a long time, only watched her with an unreadable expression. Then he spoke, his voice low and heavy. "Nathan Cross. Where is he now?" Eve shook her head. I don't know, and I don't want to know. Marcus opened his mouth to say something else, but the phone in his pocket vibrated. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and answered. Eve watched his face change in real time, from curiosity to confusion, from confusion to shock, from shock to something she could only describe as absolute horror. He shot to his feet, and for the first time since she met Marcus Costello, she saw his hand shake. What? He barked into the phone, his voice tight as if someone were crushing his throat. What did you just say? She heard Dominic's voice on the other end, trembling in a way she doubted it had trembled in 20 years. Boss. They took Bella. Dominic stormed into the penthouse less than 5 minutes after the call, a laptop in his hands, his face pale as someone who had just seen a ghost. He set it on the glass table, opened it, and hit play without a single word. The video began to run. Eve knew immediately this was not amateur footage. The camera angle was professional. The lighting was deliberate. They wanted Marcus to see everything, every detail. A dark room with gray concrete walls, an iron chair in the center, and on that chair sat a young woman, Isabella Costello, 28 years old, a biology PhD at Northwestern, a girl with nothing to do with her brother's underworld, the one he had tried with everything in him to keep away from the dark. She was bound tight to the chair with rope, her eyes covered with black cloth, her mouth sealed with silver duct tape. Her shoulders shook in waves, and even though Eve couldn't see her eyes, she knew she was crying. A man stepped into frame, Diego Vega, the leader of the team that hit the restaurant, the one who had escaped with threats still echoing in the night. He held a pistol and slowly pressed the muzzle to Isabella's temple. The girl moaned behind the tape, her body curling in on itself as if she could shrink small enough to disappear. Then a voice came from off-camera, low, cold, heavy with hatred aged over years. 72 hours, Costello. Give up Chicago, or you get your sister's body. Victor Salazar's voice paused for a beat, then continued with a sick kind of pleasure. You can ask your father what it feels like to lose family. Oh wait, you can't, because your father is dead too. The video ended. The screen went black. Silence. Eve looked at Marcus, and she watched a man collapse. No warning, no sign. One moment he was standing there, and the next his fist had driven through the laptop screen. Glass shattered, blood burst from his knuckles. Marcus didn't stop. He swept the laptop off the table, then turned to the nearest wall and started punching. Once, twice, 3 times. A roar tore out of his throat, not language, but the raw sound of pain and fury. Dominic lunged in, trying to restrain him. Boss, stop, calm down. Marcus shoved him away. Dominic, a man built like a bear, stumbled back into the sofa, and Marcus kept punching. The wall, the table, anything within reach. Blood from his hands spattered the white wall like an abstract painting of madness. Eve stood still. She didn't intervene. She only watched, because she understood. She understood that feeling, the moment when the world suddenly collapses under your feet, and there is nothing you can do except scream into the void. Finally, Marcus stopped. Not because the rage was gone, because his body had nothing left to give. He dropped to his knees in the wrecked living room, his shoulders shaking, his breath coming fast and ragged like a man drowning. Bella is everything to me. His voice was hoarse, broken into pieces. Everything. She's the only reason I didn't turn into a complete monster. She's the only clean thing left in this life soaked in blood, and I swore I would protect her. I swore. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Eve looked at him, and she didn't see the architect anymore. She saw a man who had lost everything, trying to hold on to the last piece of himself. She saw herself. She walked over, slow, and lowered herself to the floor beside him. No empty comfort, no promises that everything would be fine, because sometimes those words only make it worse. Instead, she said the truth. 72 hours is enough. Her voice was calm, certain, like steel tempered in fire. Marcus lifted his head to look at her, eyes bloodshot, his face streaked with tears and blood. If you trust me, Marcus looked at her as if she had spoken in a language he didn't understand. Trust you? He repeated, his voice rough and raw. I don't even know who you are. You know enough, Eve said, her voice as calm as a lake sealed in ice. You know I can kill. You know I can disappear. And you know I'm the only person in this room with the skills to bring your sister home alive. Marcus fell silent for a long time, his eyes studying her as if he were trying to read every thought inside her head. Then he nodded, slowly, like a man making a decision that could change everything. What do you want in return? Eve had been thinking about that since the moment she watched him break. She knew she should leave, get out of Chicago tonight, vanish into another city, another identity, another life. That was the safest choice. But seeing Marcus on the floor with blood and tears, she had seen herself 2 years ago in Medellin. She had seen someone losing everything, and she couldn't turn away. 3 things, she said. First, I need resources. Money, weapons, intelligence, anything I ask for to get this done. Second, you protect the identity of Evelyn Marlowe. Erase any trace connecting me to what happened tonight. If anyone asks, that bartender quit and left the city. Marcus nodded. And the third? The third. Eve looked straight into his eyes. After Bella is safe, I disappear. Forever. And you don't look for me. Never. He didn't answer right away. He only watched her. And in those dark eyes there was something Eve couldn't decode. Finally, he nodded again. Agreed. But I have one question. Eve waited. Why are you helping? Marcus's voice was low and heavy, as if he truly needed to understand. You could walk out right now. No one would stop you. Why stay? Eve turned away, looking out through the glass where Chicago still lived and breathed below them, unaware of the tragedy unfolding on the 47th floor. Because I know what it feels like to be abandoned by the whole world, she said, so soft it was almost a whisper. I know what it feels like to lie in your own blood, certain no one is coming. I know what it feels like to lose everything and be unable to do a damn thing about it. She turned back to him. And I won't let someone else go through that. Not if I can stop it. Silence settled between them, heavy but no longer strained. Something had shifted. A pact had been signed, not in ink, but in blood and mutual understanding. Dominic, who had stood motionless like a statue through the entire exchange, finally spoke. I have intel on Victor Salazar. He placed a thick stack of files on the table, beside the wreckage of the laptop. Marcus stood, wiped the blood from his hands onto his pants, and pulled a chair out to sit. Eve sat across from him. Dominic began his briefing. Victor Salazar, 38 years old, second-generation head of the Sinaloa cartel. His father was Miguel Salazar, who controlled the drug pipeline from Mexico to Chicago for 20 years. He paused and glanced at Marcus. 10 years ago, Miguel was killed. By who? Eve asked, even though she already knew the answer. By me, Marcus said, his voice without a trace of remorse. Miguel tried to expand into Chicago. He started by kidnapping Bella. She was 18. I got my sister back and sent Miguel a message, with the heads of 12 of his men in a cardboard box. Then I flew to Sinaloa myself and put him down. He said it like he was talking about a business trip, not murder. Victor was 28 then. He ran, went to ground, rebuilt his father's empire from the ashes. 10 years. He waited 10 years for revenge. Dominic continued, flipping through the pages. According to my sources, Victor has around 50 to 70 shooters in Chicago. He's using at least 3 different sites as bases, a warehouse on the south side, an abandoned meatpacking plant in Bridgeport, and a mansion in the suburbs of Naperville. Eve pulled the file stack toward her, flipping through page after page with the focus of someone studying a battlefield. Satellite photos, floor plans, personnel lists, patrol schedules. Marcus had a formidable intelligence network. Then she stopped. Her hand froze on one photograph. The blood drained from her face. Marcus saw it immediately. What? Eve didn't answer. She only stared at the picture as if it were a ghost, crawling up from hell. The photo showed Victor Salazar shaking hands with another man. Tall, salt and pepper hair, cold gray eyes, a charming smile she had once believed was meant for her alone. Eve? Marcus asked again, his voice tightening. You know him? Eve swallowed, and it felt like swallowing broken glass. I know him. She pointed at the man in the photograph, her hand trembling slightly. That's Nathan Cross. The room sank into silence after Eve spoke that name. Marcus looked at her, then at the photograph, then back at her again. Nathan Cross. He repeated it, as if to confirm. The handler who betrayed you, the ex-lover who sold you to the Colombian cartel. He's working for Victor Salazar? Eve nodded, her throat tightening. Seeing Nathan's face after 2 years felt like someone driving a fist straight into her chest. She had assumed he'd vanished, maybe selling secrets to some government in Eastern Europe or the Middle East. She never imagined he was right here, in Chicago, only a few dozen kilometers away from her. Nathan isn't loyal to anyone, she explained, forcing her voice to stay steady. He sells information to whoever pays the most. The CIA, the FSB, MI6, Mossad, cartels, they're all just customers. Victor Salazar is only the latest buyer. Marcus stood and walked to the window, turning his back to her. The muscles in his shoulders were rigid under a blood-stained shirt. Then now we have 2 targets, he said, his voice cold as steel. Victor Salazar and Nathan Cross. Eve wanted to argue. She wanted to say she didn't need revenge on Nathan, that she only wanted to save Bella and disappear. But when Marcus turned back, she saw it in his eyes. He wasn't asking her opinion. He was declaring it. Get it started, Marcus told Dominic. Call all the captains. I want every piece of information on Victor's activity in the last 48 hours. Every movement, every call, every transaction. Dominic nodded and pulled out his phone. Meanwhile, Eve dragged the file stack toward her and went to work. She found a whiteboard in Marcus's office and began to draw out a map. 3 likely sites: the Southside warehouse, low probability, too obvious, could be a trap. The Bridgeport meatpacking plant, medium probability, far enough from downtown to hide a hostage but hard to control with too many points of entry and exit. The Naperville mansion, highest probability. Victor would want Bella somewhere he could control completely. Marcus stood beside her, watching. He didn't interrupt, didn't cut in, only listened as she broke down each weakness, each opening. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes he added details he knew about terrain or personnel. They worked through the night. Dominic brought in reports from sources. Marcus made calls to people who could provide weapons, vehicles, and logistical support. Eve drew and redrew assault options until the whiteboard was packed with black and red ink. The 2 most dangerous mines in Chicago were running at full speed. 3 a.m. The coffee in the cups had gone cold long ago. Dominic had slumped on the sofa, snoring softly, his huge body folded in an awkward way on a couch too small for him. Marcus and Eve sat on the floor, backs against the glass wall, watching the city shift slowly from black to gray. That scar. Marcus spoke suddenly, breaking the quiet. He was looking at Eve's neck where her collar had slipped a little, revealing part of a puckered scar across her collarbone. From Columbia? Eve lifted a hand to the scar by reflex. She'd forgotten it was there, forgotten it could be seen. The bullet went through my left lung, she said, her voice flat, as if she were telling someone else's story. I remember the feeling of warm blood running out of me, the metallic taste in my mouth. I thought that was the last time I would ever feel anything. I lay in that alley for hours, staring up at the Medellin sky, thinking this is how I'm going to die. Alone, forgotten, no one knowing, no one caring. Marcus didn't speak. He only unbuttoned his shirt and turned his back to her. Eve saw the scars. Not one, dozens. Long lines crossing his skin, faded with time but still sharp enough to tell a painful story. One of them, a thick, rough scar that ran from his left shoulder down across his waist, looked like it had been stitched in a hurry by someone with no medical skill. My father was killed in front of me, Marcus said, his voice distant, as if he were somewhere else, in another time. I was 16. They made me watch while they tortured him. Then they decided I wasn't worth killing, just a kid. They only wanted to leave a message on my body. They were wrong. I wasn't a kid. Not after that night. He buttoned his shirt again and turned to face her. And in that moment, there was no architect, no ghost. Only 2 wounded people recognizing each other, recognizing the same kind of pain in the other's eyes. We're going to save Bella, Eve said, her voice softer than she intended. But she stopped, choosing her next words carefully. The best plan in the world is meaningless if there's an insider. Marcus frowned. No one is betraying me. My people are absolutely loyal. Eve held his gaze, unblinking. Victor knew you were at the Obsidian Room tonight. He knew the exact time, the location, the number of bodyguards. He knew how to take Bella without anyone knowing until it was too late. Where did that information come from? Marcus didn't answer. She saw his jaw clench. Are you sure? Eve asked again, her voice gentle but sharp as a blade. That no one in your organization is working for Victor? Eve's question haunted Marcus through the hours that followed. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't. But she was right. Victor knew too much. Too precisely. Too perfectly timed. At last, as the sun began to lift between Chicago's towers, Marcus gave Eve a small nod. Do it. Find me the rat. I need access to every communication from all the underbosses for the past 6 months. Phones, email, texts, Everything. Marcus looked at Dominic, who had just woken up and was drinking coffee like his life depended on it. Give her access. All of it. Dominic frowned but didn't argue. He led Eve into a smaller room where a bank of computers glowed across multiple screens. This is the boss's surveillance hub, he explained. Every call, every financial transaction from the captains runs through here. The boss likes to know everything. Eve sat down and started working. She wasn't the best hacker in the world, but the CIA had taught her enough to find what she needed. She began with the names Dominic provided. Marcus Costello's 4 primary underbosses: Frank DeLuca, in charge of the west side; Vincent Caruso, in charge of the north side; Tony Marchetti, in charge of the south side; and Leo Romano, in charge of the east side. 4 men who had been with Marcus from the beginning, back when he was only a 16-year-old kid inheriting his father's empire. 4 men Marcus trusted with his life. One of them was a traitor. Eve started with call histories. Thousands of calls across 6 months. She filtered for unknown numbers, international calls, unusual patterns. Frank DeLuca, clean. Calls to his wife, his kids, known business partners, nothing suspicious. Vincent Caruso, clean. A few too many calls to a number she suspected belonged to a mistress, but nothing tied to Victor Salazar. Leo Romano, clean. So monotonous it was almost boring. Tony Marchetti. Eve stopped. She saw it. A phone number with a Mexico country code, appearing 4 times in the last 3 weeks. Each call lasted less than 2 minutes. Brief, professional, like someone receiving instructions. She dug deeper, switching to financial records. And there it was, like a malignant tumor inside otherwise clean numbers. An account in the Cayman Islands that Tony had never disclosed to Marcus. Over the last 3 months, $250,000 had been transferred in. Source unknown. She checked the timing of the deposits. The first, 3 months ago, exactly when Victor Salazar started moving forces into Chicago. The second, 1 month ago, right when the small attacks on Marcus's businesses began. The third, 1 week ago, right before the assault on the Obsidian Room. Tony Marchetti, the underboss in charge of the south side, where the warehouse Dominic believed Victor was using as a base, was located. Tony Marchetti, who knew Marcus's schedule, knew Bella's routines, knew everything. Eve printed every piece of evidence and brought it to Marcus. She didn't speak. She simply set the stack of paper in front of him and waited. Marcus read, page by page, number by number, call by call, and with every sheet, she watched his eyes darken, his jaw clench harder, until his entire face became a mask of cold rage. "Tony," he said, his voice like ice. "Tony Marchetti, that bastard ate at my father's table. I saved his life 3 times. I made him godfather to the niece I was never going to have." He surged to his feet, hand reaching for the gun on the table. "I'm going to kill him, right now." Eve was faster. She stepped into his path, planted her hand against his chest, and pushed him back. "No." Her voice was steel. "Kill him now and Victor will know we've found out. He'll move Bella, he'll change the plan, and we'll lose the only advantage we have." Marcus stared at her, eyes burning. "Then what do you want me to do? Let him keep betraying me?" "Use him," Eve said. "We feed Tony a false plan. Tell him we're going to hit the Southside warehouse. He'll report it to Victor. Victor will concentrate his people there for an ambush. And while that's happening, you take another route." She turned to the whiteboard and pointed at a diagram of Chicago's sewer system. "A tunnel line runs straight to the basement of the Naperville mansion. I go in alone, find Bella, and get her out while Victor is busy dealing with the fake assault." Marcus went silent, thinking. Then he nodded. Slow. "Fine. We do it your way. But after Bella is safe, you can do anything you want to Tony." Dominic, who had stood motionless through the whole exchange, finally spoke. He walked to the table, set his own gun down gently, and looked at Marcus with an expression Eve had never seen on him before. Cold, deep, filled with hate. "When this is done, I want to handle Tony myself." Marcus looked at his right hand, his closest friend, and nodded. "You've earned that." Eve said nothing. She only stood there, watching Dominic with the gaze she had learned over years as an operative, the gaze of someone who never fully trusts anyone. Tony was the traitor. That was clear. But in this world, where loyalty was bought with money and sold with blood, who else could not be trusted? Eve's burner phone vibrated at 2 o'clock the next afternoon, when she was alone in the office, studying the sewer system diagrams for the 10th time. Marcus was meeting with the captains in the room next door, laying out the fake plan. The plan Tony Marchetti would carry straight to Victor Salazar. She looked at the phone screen. An unknown number. No name. Just a short message that made the blood in her body turn to ice. Meet me. Warehouse 17, Navy Pier. Alone. Or I tell Victor where you are. Signed N.C. Nathan Cross. He knew she was alive. He knew where she was, and he wanted a meeting. Eve should have told Marcus. She knew that. It was the reasonable choice, the safe choice, the right choice, but something inside her, a part she had buried since Medellin, was screaming to face the man who had betrayed her, to look him in the eye and ask why. She left the penthouse without telling anyone. She took a car from the garage Dominic had provided, drove through Chicago under a gray sky that threatened rain. Navy Pier in the late afternoon was emptier than usual. Wind off Lake Michigan cutting cold through skin. Warehouse 17 sat on the edge of the docks, an old red brick building long out of service, windows broken, walls stained with graffiti. Eve checked her gun one last time before she stepped inside. The space within was dark and damp, the smell of lake salt braided with rust and time. Weak light seeped through filthy window panes, laying pale streaks across cracked concrete, and standing in the middle of one of those streaks, like an actor on a stage, was Nathan Cross. He had not changed much in 2 years. Still tall, still thin in that dangerous way a snake is thin, still handsome in the cold manner Eve had once mistaken for charm. Salt and pepper hair cut neatly, an expensive gray suit, steel gray eyes with no depth, no warmth, only the hard calculation of a predator. 38 years old and not a single worry line on his face, because men like Nathan Cross did not worry, they only calculated. "Hello, Ghost," he said, his voice still low and smooth the way she remembered, the voice that had once whispered love in the dark. "You look more alive than I expected." Eve did not answer. She only stood there, gun in hand but not raised, eyes never leaving him. He smiled, the smile she had once believed belonged to her alone. "You are not going to say hello? After everything we had?" "Everything we had," Eve repeated, her voice flat as frozen water. "You sold me to a Colombian cartel. You let them put 3 bullets in me and leave me to die in an alley." Nathan shrugged, without a trace of regret. "Work is work, Ghost. You know that. You have killed for money too. We are not different. We are very different. Maybe." He stepped closer, and Eve raised the gun, aiming straight at his chest. He stopped, but he did not look afraid. "I came with an offer. Victor Salazar wants your head, but I can persuade him to change his mind if you come back to work for me." Eve gave a small, bitter laugh. "Work for you? After everything? I can protect you from Victor," Nathan said, his voice sweet like honey laced with poison. "I can give you a new identity, a new life. You will not have to run anymore. All you have to do is a few jobs, use the skills you have tried to bury. No. Final. No thought needed." Nathan sighed as if Eve had disappointed him. "You are still stubborn, just like before. All right, I guess I will have to persuade you another way." He slid a hand into his pocket, and Eve tightened her grip on the gun, but he did not pull a weapon. He only tilted his head, watching her with an expression she could not read. "Do you know why the CIA recruited you?" he asked, his voice shifting, lower, more dangerous. "Because of my high IQ," Eve answered. "Because of my adaptability. Because no one would care if I died. That is what they told you." Nathan smiled, a smile that never reached his eyes. "But it is not the truth, not the whole truth." Eve's heart began to pound faster. She hated herself for it, hated that he could still touch something inside her. "Say it. Your parents," he said, each word falling like a drop of toxin. "They were agents, both of them, operating in Eastern Europe for 10 years before you were born, and they did not die in a car accident." The warehouse suddenly felt colder, or maybe the blood in Eve's body had stopped moving. She felt as if someone had pulled all the air out of her lungs. "You are lying." Her voice trembled, and she hated that too. "I have many things, Ghost," Nathan replied. "But lying is not one of them. Not about this. Your parents were killed by the CIA, and I know why." Eve kept the gun trained on Nathan, and for the first time in years, her hand shook. "What did you just say?" Nathan savored her silence the way a man savors a fine wine. He knew he had struck something tender, and he enjoyed every second of it. "Your parents," he began, his voice slow, almost like he was telling a bedtime story, "were two of the best agents the CIA ever had. James and Catherine Marlowe. They worked in Eastern Europe for 10 years, specializing in intelligence collection from old Soviet networks. They were legends inside the agency, until they discovered something they were never supposed to find." Eve said nothing. She couldn't. Her mouth was dry as a desert, and the gun in her hand felt as heavy as the whole world. "Corruption," Nathan went on, his eyes bright with a sick kind of delight as he watched her hurt. "A network selling information to the enemy, reaching from low-level operatives all the way up to very, very high names inside the agency. Your parents found proof. They planned to expose everything, drag it into the light, bring the whole system down. They thought they were doing the right thing." He paused, then gave a short, contemptuous laugh. "They were wrong." "Stop," Eve said, her voice like the groan of a wounded animal. But Nathan didn't stop. He moved closer, step by step, like a python tightening around its prey. The CIA couldn't let that happen. Too many powerful people would be hit. Too many secrets would be dragged out. So they ordered a cleanup. On March 17th, a truck lost control on Interstate 41 and hit the Marlowe family sedan head-on. James died on impact. Catherine died on the way to the hospital. A tragic accident. No one suspected a thing. Eve felt herself shaking. Her whole body trembled as if she were standing in a blizzard. Images she didn't know she still carried began to rise. The smell of gasoline, metal grinding against metal, someone calling her name, blood, so much blood. "You were found in the back seat, unconscious but barely injured." Nathan continued, his voice now gentle, as if he were rocking her to sleep. "A miracle," they said, "the only child who survived. You were placed into the foster system, and the agency watched you from there. 12 years. They watched you grow, watched you develop, watched you become exactly what they wanted. And when you were old enough, they came to recruit you, not because of your high IQ, but because you were James and Catherine Marlowe's daughter. Using the tool your parents left behind. That is what they called you in internal reports." Tears slid down Eve's cheeks without her noticing. She hated herself for it. Hated that he could make her cry. Hated that she could still feel pain after all those years of learning to freeze her heart. "And you," she said, her voice thick, "where were you in all of this?" Nathan smiled, the smile of a devil. "I was the one who signed the order. The world stopped. The cleanup order for your parents crossed my desk. I was 26, ambitious, ready to do anything to climb. And they told me this was how you proved loyalty. So I signed. No hesitation. No regret." Eve squeezed the trigger, or tried to, but her finger wouldn't obey. It just lay there, trembling on the cold metal, unable to complete the act her whole body was screaming for. "Kill me," Nathan said, his voice daring her. "And you will never know where Bella is being held. I am the only one who can get you inside. I know the guard rotations, the weak points, everything. Kill me." And Marcus Costello's little sister dies. Silence stretched. Eve stared at Nathan, into those cold gray eyes that had stolen her parents, stolen her childhood, stolen everything. Then she lowered the gun. Nathan smiled, triumphant. "I knew you would. Next time we meet." Eve cut him off, her voice now calm in a way that was terrifying. "I will kill you. Not today, but one day." She turned and walked away, each step echoing through the empty warehouse. "You are still weak, just like before." Nathan called after her, his voice full of contempt. "That is why you got shot. That is why you will always fail." Eve didn't look back. She walked out, got in the car, and drove. Only after she was 5 miles from Navy Pier did she allow herself to look at the burner phone in her pocket, still recording. Everything Nathan had said, every confession, every detail about her parents' deaths, all of it captured. She wasn't weak, she just knew when not to fight. But that didn't stop the tears. They ran down her cheeks. For the first time since Medellin, for the first time since the night she lay in her own blood and thought she was going to die. She drove through Chicago with her vision blurred by tears. And for the first time in 2 years, Eve Marlowe allowed herself to cry for the 6-year-old child who had lost everything on a cold day in March. Eve got back to the penthouse after dark. She couldn't remember how she had driven, couldn't remember how many red lights she'd passed, how many intersections she'd crossed. Her body moved like a machine while her mind was somewhere else. On a day in March 21 years earlier, in a car hurtling toward a truck. Marcus was standing by the window when she walked in, and she knew at once he had been waiting for her. He had known she went somewhere. Maybe he had checked the security cameras. Maybe he had tracked the GPS on the car she took. Either way, the look he gave her was full of questions and something that looked like worry. "Where did you go?" Marcus's voice was hard. Not quite anger, but no longer calm. "We have an agreement. You don't disappear without telling me." Eve didn't answer. She just walked to the glass table, pulled the burner phone from her jacket pocket, and set it down. "Listen," she said, her voice raw, as if she'd been screaming for hours. Then she collapsed onto the sofa like a puppet with its strings cut. Marcus watched her for a long moment, then picked up the phone and hit play. The room filled with Nathan Cross's voice, every word, every detail. About Eve's parents, about their deaths, about the man who signed the order to kill, about how she had been used like a tool her whole life without ever knowing. Eve didn't look at Marcus while he listened. She just sat there, staring into nothing, feeling hollow as an abandoned house. When the recording ended, silence dropped heavy over the room. Then she heard footsteps, and Marcus sat down beside her on the sofa. He didn't speak. He just stayed there. "I thought they abandoned me." Eve started talking, not knowing why, not knowing where the words were coming from. "For 21 years, I thought my parents left me, that they didn't want me, that was why I had to live in foster homes where no one wanted to keep me. I blamed them. I hated them." Her voice cracked. "And now I know they didn't abandon me. They were murdered for trying to do the right thing, and the people who killed them turned me into the very thing my parents fought against." Tears ran down her cheeks, but she didn't bother to wipe them away. She didn't have the strength to care who saw her break. "I'm not a person, Marcus," she whispered, desperate. "I'm a weapon, built to kill, designed to destroy. They took an orphan child and turned her into a monster, and I didn't even know until now." "No," Marcus cut in, his voice low and steady. "You're not a weapon. You're a survivor." Eve turned to him, eyes red, and saw something in his gaze she hadn't expected. Not pity, not judgment, understanding. The recognition of someone who had stood exactly where she was standing. "They took everything from you," Marcus said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Your parents, your childhood, the truth. But they couldn't take who you are. You're still here, still fighting, still getting up every time you're knocked down. That isn't a monster, Eve. That's a survivor." Then he did something Eve didn't expect. He pulled her into his arms. There was nothing sexual in that embrace. No demand, no possession. Just the warmth of someone giving what both of them had been denied for far too long. Eve went rigid for the first second, the instinct of someone trained never to trust. Then she let go, her head sinking against his shoulder, and she cried. She cried for the 6-year-old who lost her parents. She cried for the 18-year-old who had been deceived. She cried for the 25-year-old who had been shot and abandoned. She cried for all the years she hadn't cried because she thought she wasn't allowed to. "Nathan will pay," Marcus said when her sobs finally eased. "But in a way that hurts him the most. Not a quick death, rotting in prison, forgotten by the world. He'll live long enough to know he has nothing left." Eve lifted her head and looked at him, eyes still red, cheeks still wet. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "I'm just hired help. Our deal is I save Bella and then I disappear. Why do you care what happens to me?" Marcus looked at her, and in his eyes was something she didn't dare name. "You know that isn't true. 12 more hours. 12 more hours, and everything would begin." Eve lay on the bed in the guest room Marcus had given her, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. She had tried to sleep, tried counting her breaths, tried the relaxation techniques the CIA taught for the nights before an operation. None of it worked. Her mind kept circling back to what Nathan had said, to her parents, to all the years of being deceived, and to Marcus, to the way he held her, to the look in his eyes when he said, "You know that isn't true." She got up, pulled on a thin sweater, and stepped out. She hadn't meant to go to the rooftop, but her feet carried her there anyway, as if her body understood what she needed before her mind could admit it. Chicago at night spread out below her like a carpet woven from light. Millions of lamps flickered like stars fallen to earth, and wind off Lake Michigan cut cold through her hair. She wasn't surprised when she heard footsteps behind her. She had known he would come. Somehow, she had known. Marcus stopped beside her, saying nothing, looking out over the sleeping city. They stood like that for a long time, two silhouettes in the dark, two people who couldn't sleep for reasons of their own. I'm scared, Eve said, breaking the silence. She didn't know why she confessed it. She had never admitted fear to anyone. But with Marcus, in this darkness, the walls she had built for years suddenly felt pointless. Marcus turned to look at her. Scared of dying? Eve shook her head, eyes still on the horizon. No, dying is easy. I've almost died more times than I can count. She paused, searching for words for feelings she had never tried to name. I'm scared of having something to lose. Scared of starting to care about someone and being betrayed again. Scared of opening up and getting stabbed straight through. Nathan taught me that trusting is a mistake, and I swore to myself I would never make that mistake again. But Eve turned to him, and in her eyes was a confusion she hated to admit. But you make me want to make that mistake again, and that scares me more than any gun. Marcus didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, close enough that his breath brushed the back of her neck. I'm not Nathan. His voice was low and deep, like distant thunder. I won't promise I'll never hurt you. My life, my world, it's full of pain. I can't promise that. His hand came to her shoulder, gentle, as if he was afraid she would vanish if he held her too tightly. But I promise I will never betray you, never sell you, never leave you alone when you need me. That's the only thing I can give you. Is it enough? Eve turned to face him. The distance between them was only inches. She looked up into his eyes, black as night, and saw what she had refused to see for days. Not calculation, not power. The raw honesty of a man too tired to keep wearing masks. Enough, she whispered. And then she kissed him. The kiss started slowly, careful, like two people relearning how to trust. Her mouth touched his softly, testing, as if afraid it would break. Then his hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened, more desperate. All the pain they had buried, all the years of loneliness, poured into that single kiss. They didn't need words. They didn't need promises. They only needed this moment, two wounded people finding each other in the darkness above Chicago. That night, they were together, not out of lust, but out of a connection they had both craved for far too long. The warmth of another body, the safety of someone's arms, the feeling of being seen, understood, accepted with every scar and shadow. When Eve woke, early light was slipping through the curtains. She lay in Marcus's arms, her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. He was awake, looking down at her with an expression she didn't dare name. They didn't talk about what it meant. They didn't talk about the future. They both knew their lives didn't allow long-term promises. But they had this moment, and sometimes that was all a person could ask for. An hour later, Eve stood in the living room, wearing black tactical gear, checking every gun, every knife, every round of ammunition. She was Ghost again. Marcus walked over, a small earpiece in his hand. He placed it in her palm, his fingers lingering against hers longer than they needed to. Let me hear you, he said, his voice low. Always. Eve looked at the earpiece, then at him. She fitted it into her ear, and in that instant, she wasn't Ghost anymore. She was only Eve, a woman afraid of losing what she had just found. It's time. 2 fronts, one real, one fake, and everything depended on the enemy not knowing which was which. Dominic led the assault team of 20 men toward the South Side warehouse, exactly as planned, exactly as it had been announced to every underboss, including Tony Marchetti. They moved through the dark with weapons ready, like an army preparing to storm an enemy stronghold. Tony walked right behind Dominic, not knowing that every step he took was being watched, not knowing he was playing the role of a pawn in a game he believed he controlled. 10 miles away, Eve dropped through a black manhole on the outskirts of Naperville. The sewer system swallowed her into cold, wet darkness, the stench of old waste, damp concrete, things dead and forgotten. Eve didn't care. She had been in worse places. The tunnel was narrow and lightless. Only the beam of the flashlight mounted to her rifle, slicing through the black like a blade. Water dripped somewhere ahead, echoing, steady as a countdown. Eve moved slowly, one step at a time, controlling her breathing, controlling every sound she made. Ghost. That was why they had given her the name, because she could pass through anywhere, and no one would know she had been there. The earpiece in her ear crackled to life. Marcus's voice came through, low and tight. Dom is in position. They'll start the hit in 5 minutes. Where are you? Tunnel C, 7, Eve whispered, eyes locked on the darkness ahead, about 300 meters to the basement access. Be careful. Marcus paused. Tony just fell back from the formation. He may be contacting Victor. Eve didn't answer. She didn't have to. They had known Tony would do it. That was the point of this plan. She kept moving. 200 meters. 150. Then she saw them. 2 figures guarding the end of the tunnel. Just in front of an iron door that led into the warehouse basement. They wore black jackets, rifles in hand, bored, not expecting anyone insane enough to come through the sewer to attack. A fatal mistake. Eve killed her light and let the darkness take her. She moved like smoke, like water, like air. The first guard never understood what happened. Eve's hand was already over his mouth, her knife already sliding through his throat before he could draw breath to scream. She lowered his body gently, soundless. The second man turned at the faint noise, but too late. Eve was behind him, her arms cinched around his neck in a hold the CIA had drilled into her bones. 3 seconds, and he stopped fighting. 5 seconds, and he went limp. She eased him to the floor and checked his pulse. Still alive, only unconscious. She didn't need another corpse unless she had to. 2 targets down. She whispered into the earpiece, "I'm going into the basement." The iron door opened with a soft creak. Eve slid inside, rifle up, eyes sweeping the space. The warehouse basement was larger than she expected, packed with shipping containers stacked into a steel maze. Weak light from a few bulbs overhead cast long shadows and corners too deep to read. She heard movement in the distance. Running feet, shouted orders, engines turning over. The fake assault on the south side had begun, and Victor's men were being pulled to respond. The plan was working. Eve threaded through the container maze, following the layout she had memorized. Stairwell to the first floor in the northeast corner. The holding room most likely on the second floor, farthest from the main exits. She climbed the stairs in silence, avoiding the steps she knew would creak. The first floor was empty, most of the guards already gone. She only had to avoid 2 more, slipping behind a container as they ran past toward the vehicles. The second floor. A long hallway lined with doors, and at the end, a door with an electronic lock. "This is it," she murmured into the earpiece. "I found the holding room. Going in." Eve hacked the electronic lock in 30 seconds, a skill she could do in her sleep. Green light. The door opened. She shoved it in, rifle raised, and saw Bella. The girl sat strapped to a chair in the center of the room, bound, blindfolded, her mouth taped shut. Alive. Still alive. But 1 second later, Eve realized something was wrong. Very wrong, because the man standing beside Bella wasn't Diego Vega. It was Victor Salazar. He smiled. The smile of someone who had known she would come long before she ever did. "Hello, Ghost." His voice filled the room like a funeral bell. "I've been waiting for you." The lights snapped on, and Eve saw them. 20 gunmen, rifles trained on her from every direction. No way out. Eve didn't move, didn't breathe. 20 guns were trained on her from every direction, and she knew one wrong twitch would get her killed before she could blink. Victor Salazar stepped closer, still smiling, like a host welcoming an honored guest. He was younger than she expected, around 38, with a handsome face in a dangerous way, and bottomless black eyes. "You thought you were clever," he said, his tone as gentle as if they were discussing the weather. The fake hit on the south side, the sewer entry, truly impressive. "If I hadn't known in advance." "How?" Eve asked, her voice flat even as her heart hammered. "How did you know?" Another voice rose out of the darkness behind Victor, a voice Eve had prayed she would never have to hear again. "I told you." Nathan Cross stepped into view, a victorious smile on his mouth. "You can't hide from me, Ghost." Everything slammed into Eve like a tidal wave. The meeting at Navy Pier, the revelations about her parents. All of it had been a trap. "You thought you were smart to record our conversation." Nathan gave a short, scornful laugh, moving to stand beside Victor like 2 snakes from the same nest. "But you forgot I taught you everything you know. You think I wouldn't know you'd record it? I wanted you to record it. I wanted you to hear about your parents." He tilted his head, his eyes bright with sick delight. "Because I knew it would break you. It would distract you. It would send you running back to your new man, and make you forget to check if anyone was following." Eve felt the blood drain from her face. He had followed her, from Navy Pier back to the penthouse. He had seen her with Marcus, heard their plan, maybe heard everything. "Your fake plan was decent," Nathan continued, savoring every second of her pain. "But once I knew what the real plan was, preparing to welcome you was easy. 2 gunmen came up behind Eve. She knew she should fight, should try to break free. But with 20 rifles trained on her and Bella sitting right there, any movement would get them both killed. They disarmed her. Rifle, knife, earpiece. Everything. Then they tied her to a chair beside Bella. The same rope, the same knots. 2 prizes in 1 trap. Victor pulled out his phone, dialed, and put it on speaker. "Marcus Costello," he said as the other end picked up. "I have good news." Marcus's voice came through, tight as a wire. "If you touch Bella—" "Oh, your sister is fine," Victor chuckled. "But you should worry about both women now. I've got your sister and your little doll." Silence on the other end, long and heavy. Eve could picture Marcus standing there, fists clenched, face drained, trying to contain the rage boiling inside him. "What do you want?" Marcus asked, his voice ice cold, but Eve heard the fracture underneath. "Simple," Victor replied. "I want you. Come to the Southworks steel mill. Alone. 1 hour. Bring anyone. And all 3 die." She heard Dominic's voice somewhere behind Marcus, distant but clear enough to understand. "We hit them?" "No," Marcus answered, decisive. "I go alone." "Boss, that is suicide," Dominic protested. "He'll kill you the second you walk in. That is my sister." Marcus cut him off. Then he paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed, softer, more painful. "And her." Victor ended the call with a satisfied smile. He looked at Eve with triumph in his eyes. "He'll come," he said. "They always come. Love makes people stupid." Nathan stepped closer to Eve, bending down until he was level with her eyes. "You see?" he whispered, voice like venom. "You thought you found someone else? Thought you could start over? But you bring death to them. That's all you know how to do. That's all you are." Eve didn't look at him. She stared straight ahead at the bare wall and tried not to imagine Marcus driving here alone, walking into the trap she had accidentally led him into. Miles away, Marcus Costello walked out of the penthouse alone into the Chicago night. Dominic called after him, begging him to reconsider. But Marcus didn't turn. He drove through the city in silence, and in his mind he saw his father 20 years earlier, walking into a meeting he never returned from. History was repeating, and Marcus Costello was stepping into the dark alone, the way his father once had. The Southworks steel mill sat on the far southern edge of Chicago like a gigantic industrial corpse. It had once been a symbol of prosperity. Now it was nothing but a skeleton of rusted steel, cracked concrete walls, and darkness thick as ink. They moved Eve and Bella here right after the call with Marcus, stuffing both women into the back of a truck and hauling them through Chicago in the night. Now the 2 of them sat tied to chairs in the center of a vast factory bay, where light from a few dangling industrial bulbs carved weak bands of brightness through a sea of shadow. The smell of rust, old machine oil, and time lay over the place like a heavy blanket. Victor Salazar paced in front of them, his footsteps echoing across the fractured concrete. He had traded his suit for a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, like a man getting ready to do the work himself. "Do you know who my father was?" he asked, not truly expecting an answer. "Miguel Salazar. The world called him a cartel boss, a drug trafficker, a criminal. But to me he was a hero." He stopped, his eyes going distant as if he were staring back through years. "He built an empire from nothing. He gave our whole village work when the government abandoned them. He sent me to the best schools, taught me how to be a man." Victor's voice tightened, his jaw grinding. Then Marcus Costello showed up, smiling like a friend, offering peace. "He invited my father to negotiate, promised to share territory, promised to end the war. My father believed him, and he killed my father right at the table. Slit his throat like you slit a pig's throat." Victor turned back to Eve and Bella, his eyes blazing with hatred fermented for 10 years. "It took me 10 years to rebuild. 10 years to become strong enough. 10 years to wait for this moment. And tonight, Marcus Costello will die the way my father died. Painfully, humiliated, in front of the people he loves." He walked away to check on his guards, leaving Eve and Bella in silence. Bella sat beside Eve, trembling, but she fought to hold back sobs. Eve could see the girl trying to be strong, trying not to let the enemy see her fear. Brave, like her brother. "I'm going to get you out of here," Eve whispered, quiet enough that the guards at a distance couldn't hear. Bella turned to her, eyes red but no longer covered. "Who are you?" the girl asked, her voice shaking. "I'm your brother's girlfriend," Eve answered, then stopped, thinking about what she had just said. "I think," We haven't exactly talked about it. He'll come, Bella said. Not a question, but a certainty. He always comes. I know, Eve said. That's why I need to get you out before he does something stupid. In Eve's palm, the hairpin she had hidden before she was captured was slowly doing its work. It was the first skill the CIA taught her, how to get out of restraints with anything you could find. The rope scraped her wrists raw, but she could feel it loosening. Just a few more minutes, but she didn't have a few minutes. The rumble of engines rose from outside. Doors slammed, shouts and the sound of fists. Then the factory's great door swung open, and Diego Vega walked in, dragging a man whose hands were cuffed. Marcus, they had beaten him. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead. His lip was swollen, one eye bruised and purple, but he still stood straight, chin lifted. Still, the architect, even as he was hauled into the enemy's den. Diego threw Marcus onto the concrete at Victor's feet. Marcus hit his knees but didn't collapse. He lifted his head, and his eyes found Eve immediately. Not Bella, not Victor, her, and in those black eyes, through blood and bruises, Eve saw a message as clear as daylight. I will not let you die here. Victor stepped in front of Marcus, slowly, savoring the moment he had waited 10 years for. He slipped off his suit jacket, rolled up his shirt sleeves like a butcher getting ready to work. The first punch slammed into Marcus's jaw with enough force to snap his head to the side. Marcus didn't cry out, not a sound. He only spat blood onto the concrete and lifted his head again, staring straight into Victor's eyes as if daring him to keep going. Victor hit him again. Again. Ribs, face, gut. Each blow carried 10 years of fermented hatred. Each blow was a curse that never needed words. Eve bit down so hard she tasted blood. With every thud, she worked faster at the ropes. The hairpin in her hand kept moving, strand by strand the knots loosening, but not fast enough. Not fast enough, Marcus sagged, his knees striking the floor, blood dripping from his mouth and nose, but he didn't scream. He didn't beg. He only looked up, and his eyes found Eve, held her, never blinking, as if she were the only anchor keeping him upright in the storm of pain. Do you know what the worst part is, Costello? Victor panted, breath ragged from effort. My father trusted you. He thought you were an ally. He went to that meeting alone because he believed your promise. Marcus coughed up a dark clot and laughed. Hoarse, the laugh of a man with nothing left to lose. Your father tried to kill my sister first. His voice was shredded but clear. I was just faster. Victor froze mid-swing. What? Miguel Salazar kidnapped Bella when she was 16, Marcus went on, each word like a bullet. He meant to use her as leverage to force me to hand over Chicago. When I refused, he sent me a video, my sister's pinky finger, cut clean off. Bella let out a raw sob behind Eve, the sound of someone reliving an old nightmare. Eve felt her chest tighten. That peace negotiation? Marcus spat blood and held Victor's gaze. It was the only way I could get close to where he was holding Bella. I didn't betray your father. I killed him to save my sister. There's a difference. Lies, Victor screamed, the calculating calm he had worn all night cracking apart. You're making it up to justify your crimes, asked Diego. Marcus said, terrifyingly even. He was there. He was one of the men guarding Bella. He saw everything. Every pair of eyes in the room swung to Diego Vega. He stood stiff, face carved from stone, saying nothing, but his silence was an answer. Diego? Victor's voice shook. Say it. Tell me he's lying. Diego stayed silent. And in that silence, Eve watched everything Victor had believed for 10 years begin to collapse. He had built an empire on hatred. He had lived and breathed for this day. And now the truth was crushing him from the inside out. No. Victor shook his head, stepping back. No. My father wasn't like that. He was a hero. He loved me. He was a good man. He drew a gun from the small of his back, his hand trembling, aiming at Marcus. You're lying. You're trying to manipulate me the way you manipulated my father. I'm going to kill you right now. Eve was almost free. Just a few more seconds. Just. Then she heard it. A distant, growing vibration. Rotor blades chopping the night air. A spotlight speared down through the factory's broken windows, turning darkness into day. FBI. A voice boomed through a loudspeaker, echoing across the cavernous space. Drop your weapons. You are surrounded. Victor went rigid, gun still trained on Marcus, eyes wild, scanning like a cornered animal. His cartel men panicked, scrambling for defensive positions, shouting orders in Spanish. Nathan Cross vanished into the dark like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Eve smiled, the first time since she'd been taken. The call she had made 3 weeks earlier, right after she agreed to help Marcus. The call to Special Agent Sarah Chen at the FBI, someone she had known from her field days, someone she had sent every piece of evidence she had on Victor Salazar and his trafficking ring. She never fully trusted any plan. That was why she was still alive. There was always a contingency, and her contingency had just arrived with guns and helicopters. Everything happened at once. The factory's main door was blown open by a small charge, and dozens of FBI agents surged inside in flawless tactical formation. They wore black armor and helmets, automatic rifles raised, shouting commands in English and Spanish. Victor's cartel men reacted on instinct, firing toward the dark shapes flooding in. Gunfire roared through the vast hollow of the abandoned mill, the sound brutal and sharp, like thunder trapped in a cavern. Detective Sarah Chen led the raid, the woman Eve had contacted 3 weeks earlier, right after that first night in Marcus's penthouse. Eve never fully trusted anyone. That was the first lesson the CIA taught her, and the only lesson she never forgot. When she agreed to help Marcus, she knew everything could go wrong. The plan could fail. They could be captured. They could die. So she had sent Sarah everything she had on Victor Salazar, his trafficking ring, the murders, every crime he'd committed on American soil. She hadn't told Marcus. She hadn't told anyone. It was her insurance, her plan B in case everything else fell apart. And it had fallen apart. But plan B was working. In the chaos of the firefight, no one noticed Eve. She worked the last strand of rope off her wrists, swallowing a groan as the fibers tore her skin open, and sprang to her feet. She turned to Bella, hauled her up, and cut her free in seconds. "Run!" Eve shouted into Bella's ear, shoving her toward the eastern exit. "Find someone in an FBI jacket. Tell them you're Isabella Costello. They'll protect you." Bella hesitated, eyes flooded with tears as she looked toward her brother still kneeling in the middle of the floor, covered in blood. "I'll save him!" Eve shouted back. "Go!" Bella ran. Eve turned and charged into hell. She had no weapon. Only instinct and years of training burned into bone. The first cartel gunman was crouched behind a steel column, firing at the FBI. He never saw Eve coming. She kicked the back of his knee, dropping him, then slammed his head into the steel. He went down. She tore the rifle from his hands and kept moving. The second man spun at the sound. Eve shot him in the shoulder before he could raise his weapon. The third tried to run, but she was faster. 1 round into the thigh. He dropped, screaming. Ghost was back. Not a bartender, not Marcus's lover. The killing machine the CIA had built in nameless dark rooms. Across the mill, another fight was unfolding. Dominic Russo, who hadn't obeyed Marcus, who had followed his boss here even after being ordered not to, was facing Diego Vega, 2 right hands of 2 empires, 2 loyal dogs of 2 masters. They fought bare-handed because their guns were somewhere lost in the chaos, because this was personal. Dom was bigger, stronger, but Diego was faster, more cunning. They traded blows with the savagery of men who had spent their entire lives inside violence. Diego drove a fist into Dom's ribs, and Eve heard bone crack from 10 meters away. Dom roared, not from pain but rage, and answered with a headbutt that shattered Diego's nose. Then a punch, another punch, and the final punch dropped Diego Vega to the concrete where he didn't get up again. Dom stood there, breathing hard, one hand clamped over the ribs where 2 bones had snapped, blood running from a cut on his face. But he was still standing, and Diego wasn't. Eve cut across the battlefield, dodging bullets and bodies, eyes locked on Marcus. He was still where he'd been, still on his knees. But now Victor was behind him, one hand fisted in Marcus's hair, the other pressing a gun to his head. "Back up," Victor screamed when he saw Eve closing in, eyes wild, sweat and tears streaking his face. "Back up, or I kill him. I swear I'll kill him." Eve stopped. Her rifle was trained on Victor, but she didn't have a clean shot. Marcus's head blocked most of Victor's body. If she fired, she could hit Marcus. A deadlock. Victor couldn't run with the FBI closing in. Eve couldn't shoot without risking Marcus. And Marcus, his face slick with blood, looked at her with eyes that were trying to say something she didn't want to understand. He was telling her to leave, telling her to save herself, telling her not to die for him. She wouldn't listen. She was calculating angles, searching for an approach, building a plan. Then she felt it, cold metal pressing into the back of her neck, and a familiar voice breathed right behind her, a voice from nightmares, from scars, from the past she had tried to bury. "Drop the gun, Ghost," Nathan Cross whispered, his breath against her ear. "This time, I'm going to make sure you die." Eve dropped the gun. The sound of metal striking concrete rang through the chaos, but for her, it was the only sound that existed. She turned slowly, facing Nathan Cross, the man who had betrayed her, had killed her parents, had turned her into the thing she hated. He stood there with a gun aimed at her face, a triumphant smile on his lips. "You should have stayed in your grave, Ghost," Nathan said, his voice like venom. 2 years of running, building a new life, and in the end you still wind up here, in front of me, waiting to die. Eve stared into his eyes and felt no fear. Only a strange calm, like the surface of a lake before a storm. "And you should have learned to check whether someone is really dead," she replied, and then she moved. Her hand knocked the barrel aside just as Nathan squeezed the trigger. The bullet tore past her ear, hot and burning, but she didn't stop. She drove a fist into his throat, stealing his breath, then grabbed his gun, wrist, and twisted. The gun fell. The fight turned into bare hands. Nathan was stronger than she was, more experienced. He had trained her. He knew every move she used, had taught her how to kill. But there was something Nathan didn't have that Eve did, a reason to live. He punched her in the face, and she reeled but didn't fall. She kicked his knee, and he snarled and grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. She slammed her elbow into his ribs, once, twice, until he let go. They traded blows under the crack of gunfire and the screams around them. Blood from Eve's mouth dotted the floor. Blood from Nathan's nose smeared across his white shirt. They were both bleeding, both hurting, and neither of them stopped. Nathan swept her legs out and she hit the ground. He dropped onto her, both hands clamping around her throat with the strength of a madman. Eve couldn't breathe. Her vision narrowed to black. She saw Nathan's face above her, twisted with hate, and she knew if she didn't do something she would die here. Her hand fumbled over the concrete, searching, and found something familiar. The hairpin. Still there, dropped when she freed herself earlier. She snatched it and drove it in, straight into Nathan's left eye. He screamed, a sound that no longer sounded human, and his hands tore away from her throat. Eve dragged in a deep breath, her lungs on fire, then kicked him off. Nathan rolled across the floor, clutching his bleeding eye, his screams echoing through the mill. Eve pushed herself up, shaking, her eyes finding the gun Nathan had dropped. She picked it up and aimed at him. Nathan lay there, blood spilling through his fingers, but he was still smiling. The mad smile of someone who knew he had lost. "Do it," he spat. "Kill me. Prove you're a monster like me. Prove the CIA built a perfect murderer." Eve stood with her finger on the trigger, and she saw everything. Her parents in the only photograph she still kept, smiling beside their little girl. The alley in Medellin, her blood pooling on filthy ground. Marcus, looking at her with eyes that didn't judge, telling her she wasn't a weapon, she was a survivor. She lowered the gun. Nathan stared at her, stunned. "What?" "You're not worth it," Eve said, her voice ice cold. "You're not worth carrying in my head for the rest of my life. You're not worth me becoming a killer for you. You're going to rot in prison, Nathan Cross. You're going to live long enough to be forgotten by the world. And that's a fate worse than death for someone like you." "FBI," a voice shouted from behind. "Drop your weapon." Detective Sarah Chen and 2 other agents appeared, guns trained on Nathan. Eve stepped aside and let them cuff the man who had once been her handler, once been her lover, the man who had ruined her life. She didn't look back. She turned toward Marcus, and she forgot about Victor. A gunshot cracked, sharp and brutal, and Eve saw Marcus jerk forward as if shoved. Blood sprayed from his shoulder. He went down. "No!" Eve screamed, the sound shredding her throat. She ran to Marcus, lifted him, and blood soaked through her hands, warm and slick. Marcus looked up at her, his eyes fading with pain, but he still tried to smile. "Are you okay?" he asked, as if he weren't the one who had just been shot. Victor stood there with the gun still in his hand, laughing like a madman. He had used the moment Eve faced Nathan to break the deadlock. He had shot Marcus from behind, and now he was aiming the gun at both of them. "It's finally over," Victor said, his voice shaking with sick joy. "Costello dies. And his whore dies too. Father, I've avenged you." Eve stood up and put herself between Marcus and Victor's barrel. She had no weapon. She had nothing except a body that was bleeding and a will that refused to bow. "You think you can save him?" Victor laughed wildly, the gun shaking in his hand. "You're just a whore who knows how to hold a gun. He fired. Eve rolled left, the bullet ripping through the air where she had been. She rolled to the body of a cartel soldier lying nearby, tore the gun from the man's cold hand, and fired back. Victor dodged and ducked behind a steel column. They traded shots in the wreckage of the abandoned mill. The gunfire boomed like thunder. Eve moved from one piece of cover to the next, shooting with precision, conserving ammunition. Victor sprayed rounds in panic, all the calm he had tried to hold through the night gone. One of Victor's bullets found Eve's thigh. She dropped, pain tearing through her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Marcus was behind her, bleeding, waiting for her to save him. She swallowed the pain, raised the gun, and fired. The bullet punched through Victor's gun hand. He screamed, the weapon flying away, and Eve lunged before he could reach for it. They went to fists. Victor had training too, not like Nathan, but enough to be dangerous. He swung and she slipped it. She kicked and he blocked. They traded blows through blood and sweat, hatred and desperation. But Eve had something Victor didn't. She had a reason to fight harder than him. She had someone to protect. She had a future she wanted to live long enough to reach. Eve's final punch dropped Victor. He hit the floor and she straddled him, fist raised, ready to finish it. "Kill me," Victor whispered, his eyes empty. "End it. I have nothing left." Eve looked down at him, then looked back at Marcus behind her, breathing hard, still watching her with eyes full of trust. She lowered her fist. "You're not worth turning me into a killer again." She stood and stepped back, letting the FBI surge in and cuff Victor Salazar. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just lay there, shattered, like an empire that had finally collapsed. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. They lifted Marcus onto a gurney, started blood, packed the wound. Eve didn't leave him for a second. Her hand locked around his all the way to the hospital. Bella ran to them as they rushed Marcus into surgery, eyes red, and threw her arms around Eve like Eve was the only family she had left. "Thank you," Bella sobbed. "Thank you for saving him." Detective Sarah Chen found Eve afterward, when the noise had settled, when Nathan and Victor were led away in cuffs, when the Empire of Darkness had officially fallen. "You can have a new identity," Sarah said gently. "Legal this time. Witness protection. A fresh start." Eve looked through the glass into the hospital room where Marcus lay, Bella sitting beside him holding his hand. "I'll think about it," Eve said, "but I think I've found where I belong." 2 weeks later, Eve sat on the sofa in the 47th floor penthouse, watching Marcus practice walking with a crutch. He was healing faster than the doctors predicted, because he was Marcus Costello, because he was too stubborn to stay down. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, sitting beside her. "Thinking about leaving," Eve admitted, eyes on the window. "Your life is dangerous. My life, it doesn't exist. I'm a ghost, Marcus. I don't know how to live like a normal person." "Then build a new life," Marcus said, his hand finding hers. "With me. We're both broken people, Eve, but maybe two broken pieces can fit together into something whole." Eve looked at him, into the eyes that had seen through her from the first night at the Obsidian Room. She nodded, on one condition. "You let me help you turn this empire into something more legal. No more smuggling, no more violence unless it's necessary. If I stay, I want to build something that matters." A week later, they drove north toward Wisconsin, headed for a small lakeside house Marcus had bought years ago and never used, a place to rest, to heal, to begin again. Eve's phone buzzed while they were in the middle of the highway. An unknown number, a short message that made her blood turn to ice. "Ghost, we know you're alive. One last mission. Refusal is not an option." Eve stared at the screen, then looked at Marcus. He had seen her face change. "What is it?" Marcus asked. Eve handed him the phone. He read, his jaw tightening. Then he looked at her with eyes that held no fear at all. "We face it," he said, his voice steady as steel. "Together." Eve looked at him, then looked out at the road stretching ahead, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. In a city built on blood and ambition, she had been the only truth that knew how to make others bleed, and he had been the only man brave enough to bleed beside her. The highway unfurled in front of them like a promise written in asphalt and morning light. Whatever darkness was coming, they would face it the way they had faced everything else, shoulder to shoulder, blood for blood, never alone again. This story gives us a profound lesson about the power of love and redemption. No matter how dark the past is, no matter how many times we have been hurt, There is always a chance to begin again. Eve and Marcus, two people battered by life, found each other in the darkness and walked into the light together. They teach us that healing does not come from running from the past, but from facing it with someone you trust. And sometimes, forgiving an enemy is not weakness but the greatest strength, because it frees us from the weight of hatred. Thank you for following the story all the way to the final moment. If you felt this story touch your heart, please hit the subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you won't miss the next gripping stories. Don't forget to leave a like and share this video with your friends and loved ones. I truly want to know how you feel about Eve and Marcus's story. Do you believe in the power of love between wounded souls? Do you think people like them can find happiness in real life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every comment, and I value every message from the bottom of my heart. I wish everyone watching this video strong health, a joyful life, and peace each day. Thank you for giving your precious time to listen. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next video.